I didn't think much about the corvids at first. Growing up in a rural town in Minnesota, you see your fair share of crows swooping down on roadkill, perching on streetlights, or flapping lazily against gray skies. They're just part of the background. But the one I saw the morning after the accident wasn't like that. It was Monday. Early. The kind of early where the air feels colder than it should, and the sky's still smeared in muted tones of purple and gray. I was halfway through my coffee, sitting on the porch of my cabin. That's when I noticed it. A crow perched on the old wooden fence bordering my yard, not doing anything, just watching me. Its head tilted slightly as I stared back. Black eyes, small but sharp, fixed on me in a way that made the hair on my neck prickle. "Shoo," I muttered, waving my hand. It didn't flinch. That's when it hit me. The night before, I'd been driving back from Elk River. The roads were dark and slick with rain. Somewhere around mile marker 46, it darted out. A flash of black, a thud, and then nothing. I didn't stop. Why would I? It was just a bird. But now, looking at this crow on my fence, I couldn't shake the connection. "Relax, Keith," I told myself, finishing my coffee. I glanced at my watch. Time to get moving. Work wouldn't wait just because I felt off. As I stepped inside to grab my bag, I gave the bird one last look through the window. It hadn't moved. That was the first morning. Work was as dull as ever. Rows of cubicles filled with people who barely looked up from their screens, fluorescent lights casting an unflattering glow over everything. For most, it was just another day. For me, though, the crow had followed. I saw it again during my lunch break, perched outside on the ledge of the office building's parking garage. Its beady eyes stared straight at me as I sat in my car, pretending to scroll through emails. "Persistent little bastard," I muttered, shutting my phone off and leaning back in the seat. Maybe it was my imagination, but it felt like the thing knew me. My colleagues didn't notice anything unusual. Frank from accounting walked by, nodding as he shoved a bagel in his mouth. He didn't so much as glance at the bird. I tried to shake it off. After all, this wasn't the first time I'd been paranoid. My childhood wasn't exactly stable. A string of foster homes, each one worse than the last. The only constants in my life were chaos and survival, lessons learned early and hard. The habit stuck. Even now, at 38, I was jumpy in crowds, skeptical of kindness, and always kept my head on a swivel. It was probably why I lived alone, miles away from anything resembling a community. But this felt different. That evening, back at the cabin, I noticed something else. The lone crow had company, now 3, maybe 4, scattered across the fence line. They didn't caw or flap their wings. They just sat there, perfectly still, like some grim audience. I closed the curtains. Out of sight, out of mind, right? Still, I couldn't help pacing. Every time I thought about the accident, the sound came back, the dull, wet thud as the bird hit my car. I hadn't even slowed down. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. I turned on the TV for noise, but ended up leaving it on mute. The silence weighed on me, thick and oppressive. I glanced through the curtains again. More of them now. 7, maybe 8. All facing the house. That night, I barely slept. The unease gnawed at me, each creak of the cabin settling sounding like footsteps, every shadow stretching farther than it should. The crows were still outside. I checked more times than I'd like to admit. By morning, the unease turned into something sharper. I was sipping coffee by the window when it started. A low tapping, steady and deliberate. My stomach tightened as I scanned the room. Then I saw it, a crow, perched on the windowsill, pecking at the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I banged on the glass. "Get out of here." It didn't flinch, just stared at me, its head tilted slightly, as if curious. When I opened the door to shoo it away, I froze. They were everywhere. Dozens of crows lined the fence, the roof, even the branches of the lone oak tree in my yard. Each one turned to look at me as I stepped outside, their black eyes catching the light like dull beads. A strange sound came from them, not a caw, but something low and guttural, almost like a growl. It didn't sound natural. I tried to brush it off. Birds flock. It's what they do. But deep down, I knew better. At work, I couldn't focus. Every movement in the corner of my eye made me jump. By the time I got home, I was exhausted. The fence was empty now, but I didn't trust it. I locked the doors, shut every window, and pulled the blinds tight. That's when I heard it, a loud thump, followed by a slow scraping sound across the roof. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and hesitated. My heart raced as I opened the back door. The yard was empty, but the air was heavy, thick with an unnatural stillness. And then I saw it, a single feather, black and glossy, lying on the porch. I didn't pick it up, just stared, gripping the flashlight so hard my knuckles ached. The next few days felt like I was treading water, trying to keep my head above the chaos in my mind. The crows weren't the only thing haunting me. The past started creeping in again, uninvited. I hadn't been a good person. That's the truth of it. Years ago, I'd made mistakes, ugly, selfish mistakes. There were animals, yes, and more than just a few angry outbursts in my youth. But it wasn't just that. It was everything I'd tried to forget. Those are the memories that come back now, darker than before, pressing against my skull like a vice. A name kept popping into my head, Blake. Blake had been one of my old friends, back when I still had any. We'd gotten into trouble together, nothing major, just stupid stuff that felt thrilling at the time. Blake was gone now, no one knew where or why, but I had an idea. And it was in the way his disappearance had settled in the air, the way the town never talked about it. I stopped by the bar that night. Figured I'd grab a drink, clear my head. "Where's Blake?" I asked, maybe too casually. The bartender didn't meet my eyes. "Don't ask about him," she muttered, wiping the counter a little too hard. Better off not knowing. She didn't elaborate, but her words dug deep. I felt like I was starting to unravel some thread I didn't want to pull. The crows outside the bar had been quieter that day. Not silent, but quieter. Yet, as soon as I stepped out of the place, I was met with an unsettling sight. Several of them perched on the streetlight just above me. Their beady eyes followed my every movement. "Stay back," I muttered under my breath, as if that would make a difference. But they didn't move. Not an inch. Something wasn't right. And that familiar sense of being watched only seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour. The weight of Blake's disappearance hung over me like a shadow I couldn't escape. There was a connection, something I couldn't grasp yet, but was there something between the crows, Blake, and the things I'd done? I thought I'd seen it all. The crows, their strange behavior, the shadows of my past, they all felt like a tight knot in my chest, pushing me toward something I couldn't outrun. But that night, as the wind whipped against the windows, I saw something that I couldn't explain away. It was late, maybe a.m., when the first scream cut through the silence. I froze, half asleep, thinking it was just some trick of the wind. Then it came again, louder, closer. I stood up from my bed, heart pounding, eyes wide. Something was happening outside. The crows. They were back in force, their cawing deafening. I could hear the heavy beat of wings slamming against the air like they were attacking something or someone. I rushed to the front door, my feet slipping on the wooden floors, the darkness outside thickening with each step. As soon as I opened it, I was hit by a wave of cold. My breath fogged in front of me, a strange chill I hadn't felt in months. And there it was, the thing that changed everything. A massive shape loomed against the fog, blotting out the moon. I couldn't breathe. It was as if my entire body froze in place. The giant crow, no, it wasn't just a crow. It was something worse, something far too large for any bird I'd ever seen. Its wingspan was impossible, stretching wider than my front porch, its feathers like shards of black glass. Its eyes glowed, bright yellow, locked onto mine, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I couldn't move. The crow hovered there, its massive form blocking out the sky. For a moment, it just watched me, as if it was deciding what to do with me. Then, it dropped something from its claws. The truck hit the ground with a violent crash. Metal crumpled, glass shattered, my heart slammed in my chest, and I felt a hot rush of panic. That wasn't possible. The crow let out a deafening scream, and in that moment, I knew everything had changed. This wasn't just a random event. It was an omen. I ran inside, heart hammering in my ears. I had to get away, but I didn't know where to go anymore. The past I'd buried was pulling me back, and the crows that crow were the first sign of something much worse. I couldn't sleep after that. How could I? The image of the giant crow, its eyes locked on mine, refused to leave my mind. My hands shook uncontrollably as I tried to force myself to focus. I had no idea what that thing was, or what it wanted. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house. I couldn't stay anywhere, really. The next morning, the truck outside was gone, as if it had never existed. Not a dent in the ground. Not a trace of the carnage I had seen. Only the crows. They were everywhere, lining the fence, perched on the roof, some even hopping across the yard, their black eyes watching me, unblinking. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Tom, a friend I hadn't seen in a while. "You okay? Heard something weird happened at your place. You sure you're all right?" I stared at the screen, then at the crows, which were now circling overhead. My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him the truth, that something was happening to me, that I couldn't explain it, but I couldn't. Not with the way my mind was spiraling. There was no logical explanation, and I was too afraid to even try. I slammed the phone down on the kitchen table, grabbing my keys. I had to leave. I had to get away from the crows, from everything. But as I opened the door, a shadow passed overhead too large to be a bird. Too fast. My heart skipped, and I froze. No more running. Whatever this was, I was already in it. And there was no escaping the consequences of my past. I don't know what I was expecting when I stepped outside that morning, but it wasn't this. The air was thick, heavy with a strange electricity that buzzed in my ears. My palms were slick with sweat as I stared up at the sky. The crows. They were waiting, all of them, perched on the fence, the roof, even the trees. Watching. I wanted to scream, to lash out at them, but what good would that do? The thought of running, of hiding, crossed my mind, but I knew that I couldn't outrun this. Not anymore. The thing with the giant crow. It wasn't just an accident. It wasn't some freak occurrence. It was my fault. The memory of the day before flooded my mind. I remembered the way I'd hit the small corvid in the road, the casual disregard I'd felt. It was just a bird, just a life, meaningless and small. And now it had come back. No, they had all come back for me. But I couldn't keep blaming myself for what had happened. What was happening now? The thing in the sky was too big, too impossible. And the crows weren't just birds, they were a warning. I had to face this. I had to confront whatever had been set in motion. I took a slow, steadying breath, trying to focus, trying to regain control. The crows watched me, their presence suffocating, but I pushed forward. If this was punishment, fine, but I wasn't going down without a fight. I wasn't running. Not anymore. The sun was setting, casting an eerie red glow across the sky. It was too quiet. No wind. No sounds. Just the rhythmic beat of my pulse in my ears and the low rustling of feathers from the crows. They had gathered in full force now, hundreds of them, maybe more. They filled the yard, the trees, the rooftops, their eyes all trained on me. I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had been trying to rationalize everything, hoping it was a dream, a nightmare that I could wake up from. But it wasn't. The birds, the giant crow, the way the world felt off center, it was all real. I gripped the rifle tighter in my hands, feeling the cold metal bite into my palms. I had no idea if it would even do anything. I had no idea if I would survive this, but I had to try. The air was thick with tension, and the closer I got to the trees, the more I could feel it, the eyes watching. The crows were quiet now, as if they were giving me space to make my move. It was the calm before the storm, and I could feel it in my bones. I reached the edge of the yard, my breath quick and shallow. It was coming. I could feel it. The thing in the sky. I couldn't see it yet, but I knew. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. I had no plan, no idea what I was doing, but I had to act. The rifle felt like a poor defense against the terror that was coming, but it was all I had. I saw it then, the massive shadow that eclipsed everything. A black blur blotted out the sun, and in that instant, the world seemed to stop. The birds fell silent. The air, thick with dread, vibrated with something far more sinister. The giant crow loomed over me, its wings spread wide enough to block the sky. It was enormous, the size of a jet, its eyes glowing yellow with a malevolent gleam. Its talons, its claws curled around the truck, now nothing more than a crumpled heap, crushed beneath its weight. I couldn't move. My legs were locked in place, my body paralyzed by fear. It was as though the very earth had forgotten how to breathe, waiting for something. For me? For the crow? I didn't know. I could only stare, heart hammering in my chest. Then it let go of the truck, and it tumbled toward the ground. The impact was deafening. The metal crumpled like paper, but all I could hear was the beating of my own heart, racing faster than it ever had before. It was coming for me. I raised the rifle. I aimed. I pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, but it did nothing. The crow didn't even flinch. It landed with a thundering crash, sending the earth shaking beneath me. I fell to my knees, the weight of it all crashing down. I tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. It stepped closer, its eyes locking onto mine. And for the first time, I understood. The crows weren't here for revenge. They weren't here to harm me. They were here to show me something. Something that had been buried deep within me all these years. The ground was still. The giant crow, now towering above me, didn't move. Its eyes, dark and endless, fixed on me with a terrible understanding. I knew what I had to do, though part of me wished I could run. But there was nowhere left to hide. I closed my eyes for a moment. The memory of everything I had done, everything I had forgotten rushed back. The cruelty, the recklessness, the years of ignoring what I'd done. I thought I was beyond redemption. I thought it was too late to change. The crow's gaze softened for the briefest moment, a flicker of something almost human. And then it was gone. The terror I had felt vanished, replaced with an odd sense of peace. When I opened my eyes, the bird was gone. The world around me was silent, still. I stood alone, with only the wreckage of the truck and the broken memories left behind. The sky, once dark with wings, was clear again. But the truth lingered. The birds were gone, but the weight of my past remained. The sound of wings faded, and I knew it wasn't over. Not for me. Not yet. Weeks passed, but the crows never left my thoughts. No matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, I felt their presence hovering just beyond the edges of my vision. The sound of wings would whisper at the back of my mind, a reminder that I wasn't free. I've tried to forget what happened, but I can't. Every night, I feel their eyes on me, and I know somehow I always will. I don't know what they want or if they'll return, but I can't shake the feeling it's not over, and it never will be.